Names have been changed for privacy, based on documented medical cases. He popped a pimple on the side of his nose. Not a wound, not an injury, not a car crash, a pimple. He squeezed it before work, wiped away the blood, forgot about it before lunch. 14 days later, doctors were discussing whether the infection had already spread toward structures connected to his brain. But here's the part that makes this story terrifying. The pimple may not have caused any of it. In fact, it may have been the thing that saved him. This is Hidden Pathogens. Ryan Mitchell is 31 years old, married, 2 kids, construction project manager outside Columbus, Ohio, the kind of guy who solves problems for a living, concrete delays, missing materials, workers calling out, deadlines collapsing. Ryan handles all of it. The one thing he never worries about is himself. Not because he's reckless, because he's almost never sick. He keeps ibuprofen in his truck and considers that a healthcare plan. His wife Charlotte hates that. One day you're going to ignore something important. Ryan always laughs. Then I'll go to the doctor. You never go to the doctor. Exactly. And for most of his life, that logic worked. No surgeries, no hospital stays, no serious illnesses. Until one Tuesday morning, Ryan noticed a small pimple beside his nose while brushing his teeth. Tiny, red, forgettable, no pain, no swelling, nothing alarming. He ignored it. 3 days later, it was still there, slightly bigger, still harmless. Charlotte joked about it while cleaning up dinner. "Congratulations, you're a teenager again." Ryan rolled his eyes. That should have been the end of the story. 5 days after first noticing it, Ryan leaned into the bathroom mirror before work, pressed both fingers against the bump and squeezed. A little pus came out, then a small drop of blood. That was it. Nothing dramatic. By lunchtime, he had completely forgotten it existed. 2 weeks later, specialists would be studying scans of his skull, trying to stop an infection from spreading deeper into his head. And nobody knew the answer to the question that mattered most. Did Ryan cause this? Or had the nightmare already started before he ever touched his face? The swelling started slowly. At first, Ryan thought he was imagining it. A little redness beside the nose, a little tenderness beneath the eye. Nothing major. He still went to work, still drove the kids to school, still watched baseball at night. But then the headaches started. Not normal headaches. Pressure. Deep pressure. Like something pushing from behind his face. The strange part was where it hurt. Not the skin, not the pimple. Behind the eye, inside the head. Charlotte noticed the swelling first. "You need antibiotics. It's just irritated. It's spreading." Ryan finally agreed to urgent care after the swelling crept beneath his left eye. The doctor examined him quickly. "Looks like a skin infection." Ryan felt relieved immediately. Simple fix. He was prescribed antibiotics and sent home. Problem solved, except it wasn't. 2 days later, the swelling got worse, the headaches intensified, and every once in a while, when Ryan moved his eyes too quickly, his vision blurred, just for a second, then returned to normal. That scared him, 'cause blurry vision didn't belong in the story everyone thought they were telling. Ryan still went to work. That morning, one of the workers stopped mid-sentence, staring at him. "Damn!" Ryan checked his phone camera. The swelling had spread beneath his eye. Not horrifying, but enough that people noticed immediately. For the first time, he looked sick. By midday, the pressure behind his eye became impossible to ignore. Not sharp pain, pressure. Wrong pressure. Deep pressure. Charlotte made the decision for him that night. "We're going back!" Urgent care repeated blood work. This time the doctor frowned. His inflammatory markers were climbing too fast. Way too fast. The physician looked directly at Ryan. "I want you to go to the emergency room today." "The ER? For this?" "I want imaging." That word changed everything. Imaging. Scans. For a pimple. 6 hours later, Ryan finally got a CT scan. The machine hummed around him. Minutes later, the ear doctor returned with a look Ryan immediately recognized. Concern, not panic. Concern. The kind doctors try very hard not to show. He sat down. "We found something." The doctor pointed toward an area deeper behind the nasal structures. "This shouldn't be there." Ryan stared at the scan without understanding anything he was seeing. Gray shapes, dark space, meaningless anatomy. Until the doctor explained it. "This doesn't look like a normal skin infection." That sentence changed the room instantly. Then came another symptom. Ryan looked at Charlotte and suddenly saw two of her. Double vision. He blinked. It disappeared, then came back again. And somewhere inside the hospital, specialists reviewing his scans realized they may have been treating the wrong problem for nearly a week. The ENT specialist arrived close to midnight, calm, experienced, focused. He reviewed the scan carefully, then asked a question nobody else had asked. "When did the headache start?" Ryan thought. "Before the swelling got really bad." The doctor nodded slowly. Not because he liked the answer, because he didn't. The specialist zoomed deeper into the scan. "Everyone has been focused on the swelling." Ryan nodded. "The swelling isn't the part bothering me." Silence. The doctor pointed deeper behind the face. "There's inflammation extending into spaces we normally don't expect." Charlotte leaned forward. "How serious is that?" The physician hesitated just long enough to make Ryan nervous. "We need more imaging." Ryan was admitted overnight, first hospital stay of his life. At 3 a.m. he woke up and checked his phone camera. His left eye looked smaller, subtly, but enough. Nurses rushed in. Residents examined his eye movements. "Look left, look right, up, down." Every movement caused pain behind the eye. The MRI was moved up immediately, and by sunrise, another specialist had joined the case: infectious disease. That changed the atmosphere instantly, because infectious disease specialists don't usually get called for ordinary pimples. The ENT doctor sat beside Ryan. "We found the source of the swelling." Ryan felt relief flood through him. Finally, an answer. Then the doctor said, "But the swelling isn't the main problem. The infection appears to be traveling through a vein." Ryan frowned immediately. "A vein?" The infectious disease specialist nodded. "The veins around the nose connect to deeper structures." "How deep?" The doctor paused. "The skull." The room became quiet. The specialist explained that veins in this part of the face behave differently. Unlike most veins in the body, some facial veins allow infections to spread backward, toward the eyes, toward deeper spaces, toward the brain. The doctor enlarged the scan again. "There's something else. A clot, an infected clot, inside a dangerous venous channel behind the eye." Ryan felt a strange wave of relief. A clot sounded manageable. The doctor shook his head immediately. "No, this is serious, because the clot wasn't causing the infection. The infection caused the clot. That changed everything. The pimple wasn't the center of the story anymore. Neither was the swelling. Those were symptoms. The real problem was hidden much deeper, and doctors still didn't know what started it. Most people who watch these stories never subscribe, which is strange. Because if this channel teaches you something that might one day help you recognize a medical emergency before it's too late, that's worth one click. If you think it isn't, tell me why in the comments. I genuinely want to know, because what the doctors discovered next nearly changed everything. By morning, Ryan's eye looked worse. His eyelid felt heavy. His face no longer looked like his own. The infectious disease consultant reviewed the timeline again. The headaches came too early. That bothered him. Then he asked a question nobody expected. What if the pimple wasn't acne at all? The consultant enlarged the earliest photographs. This doesn't behave like a normal pimple. He walked through the timeline. Headaches first, pressure second, swelling third. Eye symptoms after that. The order didn't make sense, unless everyone had been looking at the story backward. What if the pimple wasn't the beginning? What if it was the warning sign? That idea changed everything, because suddenly the doctors stopped asking, how did the pimple become infected? And started asking, what caused the pimple? A neuroradiologist reviewed the scans again, this time focusing deeper behind the nose. That's when they saw it. The infection wasn't centered near the skin. It was centered behind the nasal structures, deeper, hidden. The pimple wasn't the source, it was the first visible symptom. Ryan had blamed himself for days. The doctors had blamed the pimple too. But now the timeline was changing. The headache started first. The pressure started first. The swelling came later. The consultant entered Ryan's room that evening. We think this started deeper behind your nose. How? We don't know yet. But they did know one thing. The infection was dangerously close to structures connected to the brain. And now the conversation changed. It was no longer about diagnosis. It was about time. Every few hours, doctors checked Ryan's eyes, pupils, eye movement, facial muscles. They were watching for nerve damage, watching for progression, watching for signs the infection was spreading. Another MRI showed inflammation near critical structures, not inside the brain, but dangerously close. The neurologist arrived shortly afterward. Ryan noticed something immediately: urgency. The doctors were no longer asking what this was. Now they were asking, how much time do we have? Surgery entered the conversation for the first time, not because anyone wanted it, because waiting was becoming dangerous. The word surgery changes everything. Ryan immediately imagined scalpels, anesthesia, complications. The consultant tried to reassure him. If the antibiotics continue working, we may avoid surgery. What if they don't? The doctor answered carefully. Then we may have to remove the infection directly. That night, Ryan FaceTimed his daughter. When are you coming home? Hopefully soon. She studied his face carefully. Your eye looks weird. Ryan laughed softly. Then she asked, are you going to be okay? No doctor had answered that with certainty yet. But Ryan smiled anyway. Yeah. Then came the hardest question. What happened? Ryan opened his mouth and realized even the specialists couldn't explain it in one sentence. The next MRI changed everything. The doctors finally identified the structure involved. The cavernous sinus, a venous channel located behind the eyes near critical nerves and blood vessels. The neurologist explained carefully, there are cranial nerves running through this area, nerves controlling eye movement. That's why Ryan saw double. That's why moving his eyes hurt. The clot had formed inside one of the most dangerous locations in the head. Then came the diagnosis: cavernous sinus thrombosis, an infected clot spreading through deep facial veins. historically deadly before antibiotics, still extremely dangerous today. Ryan finally understood why everyone had been moving so quickly, why neurologists got involved, why surgery had been discussed, and why the doctors looked terrified every time his eye changed. Before we find out what happens in those next 24 hours, do me a favor. Hit like and share this video with someone who thinks popping a pimple is always harmless. Because Ryan thought that too. And now doctors are discussing whether they need surgery to stop an infection from reaching critical structures near his brain. If you don't think this video deserves a like or share, tell us why in the comments. Seriously, we read them all. Now let's see what happened next. The next 24 hours determined everything. Ryan barely slept. Doctors checked his face constantly. Every tiny symptom mattered. Then finally, the lab results changed direction. Inflammatory markers began falling. Slowly, but falling. The antibiotics were working. The swelling stabilized. The double vision stopped worsening. For the first time in days, the consultant smiled. "We may be able to avoid surgery." Charlotte nearly cried from relief. But one mystery remained. How did this begin? Because the deeper doctors investigated the timeline, the less they believed the pimple caused any of it. An infectious disease specialist reviewed Ryan's oldest notes again. That's when he found it, a detail nobody cared about at the time. A nosebleed, several days before the pimple appeared. Then another detail surfaced, pressure behind the nose before the pimple. Then another, a strange smell, rotten, metallic. Also for the pimple. Suddenly the timeline transformed completely. The infection started before the visible symptoms. The pimple wasn't the beginning. It was evidence something deeper was already happening. The consultant leaned back, reviewing the scans again. "I don't think the pimple caused any of this." The neurologist showed Ryan a diagram of the face. The danger triangle, the nose, upper lip, area beneath the eyes. Veins here connect directly to deeper structures inside the skull. And unlike most veins, some lack valves, meaning bacteria can travel backward, toward the cavernous sinus, toward the brain. Ryan stared at the diagram, realizing how short the distance actually was. Millimeters. That's all separating a common facial infection from catastrophic complications. The anatomy finally made the story make sense. The swelling, the eyes symptoms, the clot, everything connected. But the doctors still believed something even more important. The deeper sinus infection likely came first. The ENT specialist reviewed the scans again, then pointed toward a hidden sinus cavity deep behind Ryan's nose. There, the answer sounded almost ridiculous. A sinus infection. Ryan blinked. A sinus infection did all this? Most sinus infections are harmless. There was that word again. Most. The infection had likely started inside the sinus cavity days before Ryan ever noticed the pimple. The pressure behind the nose? First warning. The phantom smell? Another warning. The prolonged nosebleed? Another warning. The pimple wasn't the spark, it was the smoke. The first visible clue that something dangerous was already happening underneath. For the first time in nearly 2 weeks, Ryan woke up feeling better. Not dramatically better, just enough. The swelling softened, the eye pressure faded. His blood work continued improving. The neurologist smiled during the eye exam. Good. One word, but it carried enormous weight. Ryan's daughter visited later that evening. She studied his face carefully, then smiled. "You look less weird." Everyone laughed, for the first time since this started. The room felt normal, and Ryan realized something. Only days earlier, doctors were discussing surgery near structures connected to his brain. Now they were discussing recovery. The ENT consultant revisited the timeline one final time. Pressure behind the nose, strange smell, nosebleed, all before the pimple appeared. The infection had almost certainly started deep inside the sinus structures first, then spread, then triggered the visible bump beside Ryan's nose. The consultant looked directly at him. "Even if you never touch the pimple, I think you still would ended up here." That sentence changed everything for Ryan. For weeks he blamed himself. One squeeze, one mistake, one terrible decision. Now the story looked completely different. The pimple may have been the thing that saved him, the warning flare that finally made an invisible infection visible. Because without it, the deeper infection may have continued spreading silently. By the time Ryan left the hospital, the swelling had mostly disappeared. The headaches were gone. The double vision continued improving. The infection was under control, but before discharge, the consultant sat beside him for one final conversation. "You blamed yourself for this?" Ryan nodded quietly. The doctor continued. "I don't think the pimple caused the thrombosis. I think the infection was already there, days before, maybe longer. The pimple wasn't the villain, it was the messenger. That's the terrifying part of this story. Not the clot, not even the diagnosis. The terrifying part is how ordinary it all looked in the beginning. A headache, a nosebleed, pressure behind the face, a tiny bump beside the nose, normal symptoms, forgettable symptoms. The kind millions of people ignore every single day. Most of the time they mean nothing, but sometimes, very rarely, they're the first visible clue that something dangerous is already happening underneath. And that's what nearly killed Ryan. Not the symptom everyone noticed, the thing nobody noticed at all. Ryan thought he caused this by popping a pimple. Doctors later realized the pimple probably wasn't the cause. It was the warning. And that's what makes stories like this terrifying. The most dangerous medical emergencies don't always begin with dramatic symptoms. Sometimes they begin with something so ordinary nobody pays attention. If you watched this entire investigation from beginning to end, hit like and subscribe, because most people who make it this far never do. And if you're not subscribing, go to the comments and tell me why. Seriously, we read everyone. This is Hidden Pathogens. And sometimes the symptom you blame is the only reason the real problem gets found. This is Hidden Pathogens?